On the eve of the Jewish Shabbat, Friday the 9th of January 2015, a lone ISIS terrorist stormed into the Jewish kosher supermarket in downtown Paris and murdered 4 Jewish shoppers in cold blood. This shocking attack, which happened just 2 days after the attack on the Charlie Hebdo offices, caused outrage and shock amongst the French Jewish community and around the world, and raised several important questions as to the main reasons for this atrocity. We are on our way to meet Dr. Glenn Feder, a security expert, to discuss the impact this terrorist attack had on the Jewish community. Glenn, it's good to meet up with you. I mean, behind us here we have the kosher supermarket that was attacked horrifically by Islamic State. What was the impact not only on the Jewish community here in Paris, but around the world?
There was a march afterwards which mobilized, some think, the largest amount of people ever in French history for a demonstration. Many world leaders joined in this march. Some were absent as well, noticeably, like Barack Obama. But ultimately, I think the world mobilized, came here, and stood against this attack, and stood against, of course, the Charlie Hebdo attack.
And we can see that the hypermarket is open today. Doesn't this say something about the Jewish spirit, that despite attacks and atrocities, Jewish people want to rebuild their lives and actually prove to the terrorists, you can't beat us because we're still living?
Yeah. Well, I think it shows an incredible resilience, and it also sends a message that these types of attacks will never stop Jews and other citizens from living their lives. But at the same time, we can't ignore that it's taken a hard toll on the community. As we know, there is a high number of Jews that are leaving France now, and a lot of it has to do with incidents like this. They're scared and they don't see themselves building a serious future in France anymore.
The Jewish agency responsible for Jewish immigration into Israel has reported that around 8,000 French Jews have made Aliyah to Israel, an increase of 10% from figures gathered in 2014. The Jewish agency is also predicting that between 15 and 20,000 Jews will now emigrate to Israel, almost doubling the current rate. This is a worrying situation, that Jews no longer feel safe in Europe. But what is at the root cause of this threat? Where is it coming from?
There were 3 ages of the hatred of the Jews. The first period was anti-Judaism, a theological hatred. Jews were accused to have killed Jesus, but also in Islamic lands, they were accused to have of treason for Muhammad, the prophet Muhammad. After this period, which was the period of empires, where Jews were in fact enclosed in ghettos, began the emancipation and modern times, the times of democracy. But in these times, a new hatred appeared, which was called anti-Semitism. The hatred was not based only on religious reasons, theological reasons, but on racial, ethnic reasons. Jews were accused to be a secret people when they were supposed to be individual citizens in their new countries. And this crisis of beginning of the middle of the 19th century, a new summit with the Dreyfus affair. And in the Dreyfus affair, in fact, what is the most important thing to my eyes was the analysis that Theodor Herzl, the founder of Zionism, did when he understood that, in fact, it was not sufficient for the Jews to have an individual freedom, but they will have to assume the responsibility for a collective destiny. In fact, anti-Semitism always targets the Jews as a people, as a group, a secret group, a plot, and so on and so on. But today we entered a third age, which I will call anti-Zionism. In fact, it's a new type of hatred of the Jews. What is hated is their being a nation, their collective destiny in the form of a nation state, which is something totally new in the Jewish destiny. And this state is said to be terrible, awful, racist, and all the evil of the earth. And but it is always the same hatred of the Jews in a new form, in a new theory, in a new doctrine.
Why are Jewish people being singled out? Why are Jewish people being attacked? And why does it seem as if anti-Semitism has got out of control here in France?
The situation is linked with the arrival of a huge immigration from North Africa, from Muslim populations. And in any society where such an important immigration arrives, there is a shock, a problem, the need of a redefinition of the collective identity.
What role does political correctness play?
The main problem. In 2001, 2002, there were in France 500 anti-Jewish attacks, but a total blackout in the medias, in the national institutions, and in the Jewish communities. We learned some years afterwards by who was the Ministry of Interior, Mr. Vaillant, in the Jospin government, in the socialist government, that in fact the government decided not to inform about these 500 attacks in order not to add oil on the fire. That is to say that there was a sort of denial of this phenomenon during more than 1 year. And afterwards, the political correctness, in fact, was sovereign. There was not anti-Semitic attacks, but intercommunal tensions, imported conflict from Israel. And Israel was responsible for this situation. So during long years, there were no recognition at all of what happened really. We had to wait till the Toulouse massacre, when the journalist discovered astonishingly that Mohamed Merah, the terrorist, was a Frenchman, which was born in France, was educated in France, but was also a jihadist.
And what are the consequences for French society in particular if the French government does not tackle this issue of anti-Semitism effectively and quickly?
The Jews are a sort of signal for all the society. What happens to the Jews will happen to everyone.
The video footage of a Palestinian boy cowering behind his father, caught in the crossfire between Israeli soldiers and Palestinian militants, made international news headlines around the world. The international press reported that the boy, Mohammed al-Dura, was murdered by the Israeli army. This provoked international condemnation against Israel and sparked anti-Semitic attacks against European Jews.
A very important journalist said that this image of the young Arab killed in the arms of his father was the new image as a very famous image of a young Jewish boy in the Warsaw ghetto with the SS with a machine gun. And so, telling this journalist, the question is, if the young Arab boy is the new Jewish boy, who is the Nazi?
Many media outlets chose to compare these two emotive images so that the obvious conclusion was likening the Israeli army to that of the Nazis. Should the political actions of the Israeli government, for good or bad, have a direct impact on Jews living thousands of miles away in Western Europe?
It's quite complicated because there is a specific situation in France. The specific situation is the big population, Arabic population in France, Arabo-Islamic population, maybe 6 million of people, and the Jews are 600,000 Jews, I don't know exactly. And that Arabic population came in France around the 1960s. And they don't feel well in France. They are workers, hard work, and they live in their head, in their mind, with a lot of frustration, social frustration, symbolic frustration. And the hate of Israel is a common ideology. In the first time, it was the fight between Israel and Palestinian was a colonial fight. Palestinians were as Algerian during the Algerian War. But now there is a new ideologic way. And the common thinking, common mind is Islamic. As the revolutionary project or socialist project in the Arab world has collapsed, the new way of ideology is Islam, Quran. And hating Jews, it's a way to refuse the integration in the European society or inside the French society. To attack Jews is a way to be, we are not from Europe. We are not in France. We are in a sort of third world in the suburbs. And the suburbs are no more France. You have a lot of part, not in all the country, but a lot of part of the suburbs. You are no more in Europe. I think it exists in Belgium, in Great Britain, and so on. And what are the goals, the social goals of that people? It's the first time they do not want to integrate the French society. They want to be on the side, and maybe with Islamic rules, Islamic moral, and so on. So, as Israel is the enemy of the Arab world in the Middle East, here, the Jews are the enemy of that very strange new kind of European population. What happened last January with the two massacres of Charlie and then the hyper-kasher shop, the link between Charlie and the Jews, the both victims, maybe they understand what threat the Jews threat all French people. And I think that what threat Israel threat the Western world. But this is not understood until now. I think there is an ideological, a political project from the radical Islam to win, to colonize the world. And it's a war. It's a war. I think we are now at the beginning, from September 11, 2001, as a symbolic date. It's the beginning of the Third World War, and the enemy is Islamofascism.
Is France at war? Should we even be talking in these terms? For the French Jewish community, it's becoming increasingly evident that they are coming under attack from more than one source. The French media appear to be taking an anti-Israel position. Just how powerful and influential is the media?
In September 30th, 2000, this Al-Dura video was broadcast on French television. The broadcast of that video triggered violence against Jews, particularly in France. It was, on France 2 television, state-owned television, by the Jerusalem correspondent Charles Anderlin. And immediately we had demonstrations, and the people were shouting, "Death to the Jews." Attacks on Jewish children, Jewish schools, rabbis, and so on. So that was the beginning of this wave of violence against Jews. As a novelist, when I heard the story that a France 2 cameraman just happened to be there at this moment when this child was shot before our eyes by Israeli soldiers, as a novelist, I said, that doesn't make sense. There is no evidence that the young man and his so-called father, we don't know, but let's say Al-Dur, Mohammed and Jamal Al-Dur, there is no evidence that either of them was shot by anyone. There is a video that lasts less than 1 minute. That's what was broadcast. In the video, you do not see anyone being shot. So we, as far as journalism goes, there is no Al-Dura incident. Whatever happened before, after, we have no way of knowing. This led me to a concept that I call lethal narratives. And I explained that this is a strategy of 21st century jihad. And so the media are not the prime movers. The media are just facilitators. These narratives are coming from higher up, from the masterminds of jihad, and they're working on all levels. We see them as Daesh. We see them as Hamas and Hezbollah. We see them as so-called Muslim leaders in European countries. And they are working on a whole variety of levels to impose Sharia, which is their obligation. And that's what jihad is, to impose Sharia in the whole world.
What's happening to France to allow this rise of Islamic terrorism in your nation?
I think it was in 2002. There was an enormous demonstration organized by Jewish organizations, and the slogan was "Synagogue brûlée, République en danger." In other words, burning synagogues, the French Republic is the next victim. And this is exactly what has happened. And this happens domestically, whether it's in Europe, in the United States. It happens internationally. If you attack Jews, there is always a reason for the outside world to excuse it. Oh, yes, it's because the Palestinians want a state. Yes, it's because the Muslims in France, they're so upset at seeing Palestinian children killed, and so on. So you get traction, you get permission, and then they broaden the target, and this is exactly what has happened. And it happened year by year. which, as I say, I have been documenting for the last 15 years, it reached a point that finally brought what you would call the silent majority out into the streets. The people in the streets on the 11th of January in France, all over France, not just in Paris, that's not your usual demonstrators marching with slogans and banners and shouting and hollering and with air balloons. This was the real French society at what it can be at its best, sincerely shocked and horrified. The result is more truth in the media, not necessarily about Jews and Israel, but at least more truth about jihad.
The evidence suggests that many sections of the French media has given its support to the Palestinian cause, which has ignited anti-Semitic attacks in France in recent years. But how much of these reports are deliberate?
The real people who are at war against Israel are the French media, are some of the Western media. They are really inciting by themselves. If you try to ask why, I think it goes with the French policy, the European policy, which is has been really demonizing Israel. You know, when Jacques Chirac was the French president, he was acting as if he had, look, I have at that time 700,000 Jews, and he was telling Israel, please do whatever my friend Yasser Arafat wants, or the Jews in France will be in danger. You know, this was a very cynical attitude. And they were, and you could listen to some French politicians telling us, look, either Israel cave in front of the Arabs, or the Jews are in danger. We were the hostages of the French government.
Philippe, in your opinion, would you say there is a direct correlation between the rise of anti-Semitism and the way that the French media report anti-Semitic incidents like we saw in Toulouse a few years ago, and the one we saw this year with the attack on the Jewish kosher supermarket and also Charlie Hebdo?
Well, I'll tell you something. The incitement, all these people who were and came to kill people were incited first by the French media outlets, were brainwashing them, putting wrong ideas in their brain. I know Mohamed Merah, the guy who killed in Toulouse, said before being killed by the police that it was for him a revenge for the Muslim children killed in Gaza. You understand? So it's always the same thing. The Kouachi brothers said the same thing before being killed at Hyper Kasher. Koulibaly said the same thing. You understand? So all these guys have received this information, and now when they went at war against the Jews, it was because they got all this message. But the problem is not Israel's attitude, it's the way it's depicted by the French media outlets.
So what's the correlation between an Israeli military operation, say, against the terrorist organization Hamas in Gaza, and the reporting of that conflict by French media or French television, and how that actually then plays out with the Muslim community in France?
The problem is that it goes straight to the brain of this Muslim community, but not only to Muslims, it goes to the whole French people. It goes to the French Jews, to the French Muslims, and to the Christian French. And I'm telling you something, all of them have been affected by this. For the Muslims, it turns them into being violent. For the Christians, it turned them being hateful against Israel, maybe not sometimes violent. And for the Jews, some of them are distancing themselves from Israel and from Judaism because they say, I don't want to be associated with this Nazi-like army. And that's really a destruction of the image of the Jews and Israel in the European brains.
So do you think there's a real danger now that the rise of anti-Semitism that we're seeing in France today, and particularly in light of the horrendous terrorist attacks against the Jewish community in Paris and in Toulouse, is indicament of the way that the French media are covering the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but also the way that they are covering up, say, Islamic anti-Semitism and Islamic attitudes towards the Jewish people here in France?
In France, truth is dangerous. And that's why I've been most of the time prevented from talking in the media. Anytime I've been invited on the French TV to talk on some issues, the day after you had articles in the media telling you cannot invite this guy, he's too dangerous. Dangerous because of what? Just because I'm telling the truth. They were trying to to prevent what they call Islamophobia. But you've never seen a Jew coming in front of a mosque and trying to bomb the mosque. You've never seen a Christian going in front of a Muslim school and trying to kill Muslim children. The opposite is not true.
What would you say then today the extent of anti-Semitism in France actually is, and why is the French government not actually doing what's necessary to confront this evil that is anti-Semitism?
Okay, to answer you, let me please describe what would be necessary. What would be necessary first, because putting cops and soldiers everywhere, very good now. But we need to prepare the future, and the future is stop incitement. So when we heard, for example, Manuel Valls or other French politicians saying, we will defend the Jews and whatever, we're against anti-Semitism, and we will fight on the internet, on the social networks, and all this stuff, I want to tell him, sorry, my friend, these are good ideas, but please come to the source. The first source of anti-Semitism in France is coming from the Agence France-Presse, the AFP. The guy is appointed by the French government, so the guy has to obey the French government. These people are inciting against Israel and the Jews, and 24 hours a day, and they're inciting each and every day. They should be changed. They should be fired, all these people who are inciting. And when you look at the French radio station, it's exactly the same, especially the French public radio station. When you look at the French public TV, it's exactly the same. So if you want to stop anti-Semitism, if you want to prevent incitement, you should stop the brainwashing system which comes from the top, from the Agence France-Presse, from France Télévisions, and from Radio France. And then you can go and fight afterwards on the social networks and on the internet. But please go to the source.
Can you share with us how ordinary Jewish people are feeling here in France with the rise of anti-Semitism and also the way that the Jewish community in Israel are portrayed by the French media?
Look, we have different kind of Jews here. First, you have the Jews who are living, I would say, in the nice Jewish area or Jewish-dominated area, like where I live in Neuilly, where life is nice, cool, everything is fine. We feel some anti-Semitism verbally, but we don't have the physical attacks. There we don't feel like we feel the threat, but we don't feel that we're under, I would say, a violence threat on a daily basis, which is completely different when you look at what's happening in other areas. If you look in the 19th arrondissement and some other areas in the suburbs, in Sarcelles or whatever, people feel the real threat.
We're just driving over to a synagogue now in Sarcelles to meet Stefan, who is an immigrant from Tunisia, who came to make his life in the Jewish community here, to share his experiences of living in Sarcelles with the increase of Islamicization that has led to a direct increase in anti-Semitism that's affected him and his community. So how has life been like growing up here?
It was very nice, you know. I used to come here on Shabbat afternoons, but I was not praying inside. I had no patience for praying, but I was with all the youngs here, exactly in this place, every Saturday from the morning till the end of Shabbat on Saturday night. This place from here till the parking there, it was full of young, very beautiful community. Today there is still Jews, but less.
Yeah. Stefan, why have so many Jewish people left Sarcelles?
First, more people leave Sarcelles, for example, more Jews leave Sarcelles than the beautiful areas of Paris, because here we have sometimes tensions with the Muslim community. As you know, there was even a kind of riot here 1 year ago when there was during the operation of self-defense of Tzahal in Gaza. So, and with all what you know that happened in the Toulouse, in Hypercacher in Vincennes, with the abduction of a young Jewish 10 years ago, Ilan Halimi. So we feel that the situation is changing. And when you live in a city with a lot of communities, Some communities there is no problem with them. Some communities there can be problem when there is something in the Middle East. So the parents have kids, they don't feel secure with their kids in the schools here. So they are the first to leave. The Jews who live in these suburbs lives more quick than the Jews who live in a bubble in the beautiful area in Paris, where they still don't feel so much what we feel here.
Why is there tension between the Muslim community here, and why are we seeing the Jewish community attacked and feel threatened that they want to leave?
Why there is tension? You know, if it depends only on the Jewish community here, there will be no tension. We support Israel, of course, but we know that we are French, we know that we are in France, and what is happening in Israel don't have to change our way of life and our way of seeing our other communities. But it's not exactly the same with some people in the other communities that each time that something happens in Israel, they see us as the representatives of Israel, and they want to look trouble with us because of what's going on in Israel. I don't know if there is a really future for even non-Jewish community, even with people who want to have a normal life in France. But for the Jews, I don't think there is a future. No.
And why don't you think there's a future for the Jewish people?
I think that in 20 years maximum, I think that in 20 years maximum, it's the Jews who will stay here. They will have to hiding their identity, and maybe they can stay here. But the Jews who will want to walk in the streets of some suburbs of France with kippah or tzitzit, it will be more dangerous than today, and so there is no future, I think, here. It's not. It already happened in the past in France or in other countries that synagogues are attacked by terrorists. So we have always to be protected. We can't afford ourselves to leave everything open like it's a bar or restaurant. We have to protect.
So can you describe any recent attacks that have happened in this neighbourhood against the Jewish community?
Yes, the most famous took place, I think it was in July 2014. It was during the operation of self-defense of Tzahal against terrorists in Gaza. So some anti-Semites from this city and from other cities of the suburbs gathered. They wanted to make a so-called demonstration for Palestinians, like Pacific demonstration for Palestinians, solidarity with Palestinians. But in fact, they tried to make a kind of pogrom. So they all arrived from the railway station of Sarcelles, like 1 mile from here. There were hundreds, and they decided to attack this synagogue because it's the main synagogue of Sarcelles. So there was riots here. There was riots. There was a lot of police who came here because they knew that there will be troubles, and there was tens of young Jewish from the Jewish Defense League who came here to protect the community. Most of the problems of the riot was here for one afternoon for a few hours, but I can show you other places in Sarcelles who have been attacked by these hundreds of anti-Semites.
We can begin to understand the daily pressures and the tension of life for a Jewish person living in the Paris suburbs. Stefan agreed to show us some examples of how Jewish residents and businesses are struggling with this new reality. Stefan, can you show us where we are now and where we're heading towards?
I want to show you a shop belonging to a Jewish man from here, from Sarcelles. It's a shop who repair TV and video, DVD and all that stuff. And this man is very known in Sarcelles, everybody knows this man. And just because he's Jewish, he was attacked, his shop, by these rioters, anti-Semites in last July. So I will show you this shop. I don't know if it opened after that. I'm not sure it opened. I think maybe left Sarcelles, or I don't know. So from here till the synagogue, like 200 meters behind us, there was riots. The police was pushing to dissuade the rioters who wanted to go to the synagogue. So this is the shop. You see, Espace Canal Plus.
Oh yes, I see.
The red, you see, is I don't know. Now it's Sunday. I don't know if it's closed because it's Sunday, but I think it's always closed since the riots because everything was destructed and burned inside.
So what was the impact that the riots had on the Jewish community living here?
The impact, it's very sad because when the Jewish community left North African countries to come in France in the end of the 50s, when Algeria, Tunisia, and Morocco became independent. They came to France because they thought that it will be a secure life and a good life here. And 40 years after they come, they see that it seems to be even more dangerous at certain moments, not every day of course, but at certain moments it seems to be more dangerous here than in Arabic country where they grew up, where they born, our parents and grandparents. Just look on the right here. You see this shop closed here with the works? It was a Naouri supermarket. This was Naouri supermarket. It was attacked maybe 2 years ago by terrorist organization, local terrorist organization. There have been few wounded in this supermarket. He opened a few weeks after, and last July, when there was this day of riots, the rioters came here and they burned it again. So now it's definitely closed, I think.
And how has the French government responded to the terrorist attacks and the attacks of the Jewish community?
They put a lot of police in front of synagogues or Jewish schools, for example. In one hand, it's good to feel that there is soldiers and police. It makes feel more secure. But when you hear the people saying the truth in the government, they say that there is too much people to look after them, dangerous, who come back from Syria, for example, and that they can't control everybody. So, and we know that we are not naive. So, of course, there is always a risk. And we don't know till when there will be soldiers. You see, for example, we were in the synagogue during the whole weeks, every day since the attack of Hypercacher, there was soldiers in front of the synagogue where we have been before. But now, for example, I see no soldiers. So one day there will be no soldiers again. And we are afraid that it can happen again like what happened in Hypercacher in any synagogue in France. Before the Hypercacher attack, there have been never soldiers in Sarcelles. This is important to say. I grew up here, I never see a soldier in Sarcelles, but these soldiers since Hypercacher, it's the real sign that something really changed here, that we crossed the line. We would like that all the communities who came from abroad will be integrated to France. Most of the communities are integrated, but in part of the Arab community, some people want to be integrated and some people want the integration in reverse, in the opposite way. They don't want to integrate to the French, to the Judeo-Christian way of life. They want the French to integrate to their way of life.
Stefan, what does your future hold here in Paris if the level of anti-Semitism that we're seeing today increases?
I think there is, for the moment, you know, we are. We don't want to exaggerate. We are not like in Crystal Night in the 1930s. It's not like that. You see, we are free, we are happy, we have work, we have everything. But in some periods, especially when something occurred in Israel and with Lebanon and Gaza. In some periods, there is a rise of anti-Semitic and attack against us. So the problem today is that these attacks occur more and more often. A few years ago, it was once every 5 years something happened. Now it's each time that something happened in Israel, something happened here. And sometimes even when there is nothing in Israel, there is also anti-Semitic attack here. So for the moment, people have to live with that. Jewish people have to live with that because they have a life here, they have family here. We are French, we have a school. It's not easy to change the life to go to another country. But I think that if it's increasing, continuing like that more and more, it will be a question of no choice. We have no choice and we will have to leave France.
It's with great pleasure to have the opportunity today to interview the president of CRIF, Roger Crickram. Roger, how did you get to be the president of CRIF, and where does your passion for Jewish issues, particularly at a government level, come from?
Well, it's a long history. It starts during the Second World War. Actually, at the beginning of the Second World War, I was 4 years old. I was hidden during the war with nuns in a convent of nuns with a false name, so I have a memory of this period. My close family survived, being hidden also, but my grandparents, uncles, aunts, cousins were all disappeared in Treblinka. They had been left in Poland. My parents came from Poland. All the family who had stayed in Poland disappeared in the smokes of Treblinka. Jews have lived in France for the last 2,000 years. We got the French citizenship in 1791 at the time of the French Revolution. And we have given to France 5 prime ministers, a lot of Nobel prizes, etc. And to find ourselves today compelled to see protection on our synagogues, on our Jewish schools with military armed with machine guns, it's terrible. It's unbearable. And some of the French Jews, we are 500,000 Jews in France, which is less than 1%. But a number of our French Jews are leaving France, going either to Israel or to other countries. Well, there is first of all the usual prejudice coming from the extreme right, which is not new, but it is not violent. The second part of strong prejudices against Jews is at the extreme left, where they are mixing between hatred of Israel and hatred of Jews. And we see a very close link between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. But the third group, which is more worrisome, is the prejudices among the Muslim part of the population. The Muslim part of the population is estimated roughly at 7 to 8 million people, which is a substantial part of the total French population, which is slightly above 60 million people. And in this part of the population, prejudices against Jews are very strong, according to that poll. And the strange thing about it is it increases with religiosity, which means that we cannot use the imams to fight it if they are more prejudiced than the others. And the problem with that part of the population is that it's among their people that we find the most of the anti-Semitic acts. And of course, the terrorist acts have been done in the past few years 100% by Muslim extremists who converted to jihad. And we have had Mohamed Merah in Toulouse in 2014, sorry. We have had Mehdi Nemmouche in Brussels at the Jewish Museum. We have had in January 2015 the authors of the kosher grocery store in Paris. So we have a problem which is, as far as violence is concerned, it's mostly with the Muslim part of the population.
Are you happy with the French government's response to the terrible terrorist attacks we saw at Charlie Hebdo,
Yes.
and also the Jewish supermarket? Are they doing enough to deal with this growing problem of anti-Semitism here in France?
You know, I'm not used to make compliments to the government, so usually I'm someone who criticizes a lot. But I must confess that the attitude of the French government, from the president to the prime minister to the Ministry of Interior, is really extremely positive. Immediately after the attack in January, early January, the government decided to put the army, not only the police, but even the army, in front to protect Jewish schools and synagogues. And we are really satisfied with the willingness and the effectiveness of the government on this issue. Unfortunately, it's not enough because things are going on and things are even worsening if we look, for instance, at internet. The hate speech which we find on the internet is a real problem. We have another problem with BDS, which is also developing in France, and again mixing between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. And these are two subjects which the government and everybody has to tackle. It's not specifically a French problem, it's a worldwide problem, but it's a very serious problem because it spoils what we call the vivre ensemble, living together.
What can be done to reassure the Jewish community, particularly those who live very close to Muslim suburbs, who feel very threatened and very concerned about anti-Semitism?
Well, what can be done is done by the government, by protecting Jewish places, but I understand his feelings, because if you bring your children in a school which is protected as if it was a fortress, with policemen and military armed with machine guns, you wonder whether there is a future for your kids in such a country. So I am respectful of such decisions, although I believe that there is also the other attitude, which is to fight adversity. I think that there is no security, no place in the world, nor in Israel, surrounded by enemies, nor in other countries. We've seen terrible attacks against the Jews in UK, in the US, in Australia, all over the world. So I don't think that there is a place in the world where Jews can be totally secured, and this is why I believe that we have to fight. I believe that French Jews are very attached to the French culture, to the French civilization, to the French history. And of course, I know that some French Jews are leaving the country, but I'm sure that there will always remain a French Jewish community in this country, whatever happens.
We've met a few leaders of the Jewish community while we've been here in Paris, and one thing they identify is the role of the French media in what they claim is inciting anti-Semitism with their malicious reporting on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which they say is having a big impact on radicalizing French Muslims. Would you agree with their sentiments?
Well, media is a usual way to put the responsibility on some other shoulder. It reminds me the definition of the anti-Semites. An anti-Semite is somebody who hates Jews more than necessary. So I believe that, of course, the French media are contributing to the bad atmosphere, but it reflects French society, and I'm not aiming against them in any way.
What role can Israel play in helping to provide not only kind of protection, but also reassurance to the Jewish community here in France?
Well, the huge difference between the 30s and today is that we have a place where to go. I remind you that in the 30s and the 40s, America, which is the best friend of Israel today, America refused to give visas to European Jews, and they even influenced their neighboring countries like Cuba, Puerto Rico, etc., to give visas. And if they would have given visas, maybe that some who disappeared would have been able to save their lives.
Are we in danger of losing our democracy and our values if our Western leaders in particular don't deal with this issue of the rise of anti-Semitism that we're seeing in Europe today?
Well, I will put the danger on another scene. I believe that the rise of the jihad in the world has become a world war. I'm not the first to say it. Pope Francis said it in September 2014 at a delegation of the World Jewish Congress, of which I was part. He said, after the Jews, it's the Christians who are persecuted, expelled from the Middle East, and he also added, we entered into the Third World War. And I believe that he's right. The war between the jihad, between the barbarian methods of cutting heads, of stone throwing on women, of killing kids, this war between these barbarians and the Western world is spreading from the Middle East, Syria, Iraq, Yemen, to Africa, Mali, Chad, Cameroon, Niger, Nigeria, and it has reached Europe. It has touched France, Belgium, and Denmark, and we are expecting the next attacks. I think it's a world war between the barbarian Middle Ages methods and the Western world, and I believe that the Western leaders are very wrong if they are not really fighting on land to combat this, because it is spreading, it is dangerous for our values and for our future.
What policies would you like to see the French government and that of the European Union introduce in order to combat the growing rise of anti-Semitism in Europe today?
As I said, it's a war, and you don't fight a war without sending soldiers. European population have, after the Second World War, decided to create Europe with the idea that they would become a big, fat, prosperous, neutral Switzerland. And they're not ready to fight. You don't see, apart from the French army in Mali, you don't see any European soldier in any place of the world fighting against the jihad, and the jihad is fighting against us. It's a one-sided war, and we have to wake up.
Do you have a message for our Western leaders when it comes to the issue of anti-Semitism, that failure to tackle anti-Semitism only then leads to greater terrorism and greater violence to other populations and other countries?
Well, we have to fight this war in all the places where it is developing. I mentioned the ground places in the Middle East, but it has to be fought also on internet. We discovered that Mohamed Merah and Mehdi Nemmouche were trained on internet, on Facebook, on Twitter, on Google, and we should not let this area, which is a result of a huge scientific progress, in the hands of hate speech and people who want to destroy us.
And finally, Roger, do you have a message for the Anglo-Jewish community who are very, very concerned with what they're seeing on the continent, and that is a rise of anti-Semitism? Well,
they are very right to be concerned, because it's not reserved. What we suffer today is not reserved to the French Jews, and all the Jews in the world are concerned, and moreover, it's not the problem of the Jews, it's a problem of the Western civilization, of the Western, of Europe. Europe has to raise and to understand that there is a war which is being developed against our civilization.
It is becoming very apparent that we are facing a very real threat to our Western civilization. France has experienced an unprecedented wave of terrorism that is threatening the French way of life. Islamic extremism is loudly spreading its message of hate and violence against our cherished values of democracy and liberty. Our war is being waged on the multitude of fronts, from the newsroom to the very streets of France, with the Jewish people on the front line in this war. What is happening to the Jewish people today in Europe is a warning of what is to come for the rest of European society. In our next journey, we travel to Brussels, to the heart of the European Union and its institutions, to discover the extent of Jew hatred in Belgium.